Hey, welcome back to Taste Test Thursdays. We're talking about the deluded brain, why control feels safe, how certainty feels holy, and complexity feels threatening. Because I know you've seen how online debates often turn into a full-blown keyboard war. People lash out with rage when their beliefs, whether political, religious, or social, are challenged. But why? What's behind these intense emotional responses? Well, what if it's not just about the bad ideas, but something deeper, like a brain imbalance? Or what if our need for certainty and addiction to outrage comes from the way our brains are wired to process the world? Today, we're diving into the neuroscience behind these defensive reactions. We'll see how the brain's wiring for survival influences everything from ideological rigidity to emotional hijacking. This week, I'm setting the stage for something important that we're going to be exploring this following Tuesday with a very important interview where we're talking about how PTSD and complex PTSD are not the same thing. And it's an episode you won't want to miss, especially if you've ever felt stuck in a similar cycle with emotional reactions that you can't seem to control. Let's review something we've discussed before, amygdala hijacking. If you remember, the amygdala is the part of your brain that processes emotions like fear and anger. Now, when the amygdala gets triggered, especially in a stressful or traumatic situation, it can completely bypass the more rational prefrontal cortex. So this results in what we call an emotional hijack, where the brain goes straight into a fight or flight mode, often in situations that don't actually require that level of reaction. As Peter Mountford put it in The Dismal Science, at its most basic, the allure of fundamentalism, whether religious or ideological, liberal or conservative, is that it provides an appealing order to things that are actually disorderly. That line hits at something crucial we've explored many times before. The human brain craves order, especially in the face of chaos. The illusion of control is one of our brain's favorite coping mechanisms, and when we find a system, religious, political, or otherwise, that delivers black and white certainty, that gives us that dopamine hit. Rigid ideologies offer a tidy framework that feels safe and predictable, especially in times of confusion, disillusionment, or personal crisis. And that's not just philosophy, that's neurology. When chaos was the norm, control becomes a coping mechanism. So for many of us, rigid beliefs are not just intellectual frameworks, they're emotional survival strategies. The need for control, the drive for perfection, the desire to be good enough to earn love, those weren't just quirks of personality. These were adaptation to childhoods where emotional needs were unmet. And like many people who grow up in households marked by emotional neglect, these patterns shaped everything. Our relationships, our careers, our bodies, and the ideologies we cling to. Psychologists like Alice Miller and Ilan Golom have long noted how children raised in emotionally unavailable or narcissistic homes often create a false self, a version of themselves designed to gain approval and avoid rejection. It's a blueprint that gets carried into adulthood, often unconsciously. And that's why fundamentalist spaces feel so magnetic to people with childhood trauma. They offer us clear rules instead of emotional chaos, unconditional love, that's in quotation marks, that is actually highly conditional, a surrogate parent in the form of a deity or an ideology that tells you who to be and what to do. Religious trauma often echoes family trauma because it's a new version of the same wound. And we explored this in a conversation with Connie A. Baker earlier this season, and that is referenced in the episode blog. Please check that out. When identity is built on compliance. So when a community rewards obedience over curiosity, this creates the dynamics of an authoritarian environment. You're loved when you perform correctly. You belong when you don't question. You're good when you conform. So what happens when you start to deconstruct? What happens when you question? The moment someone questions the truth, it's perceived as betrayal, not just of doctrine, but of identity and tribe. And that's when we see Verbal attacks. You might be called a heretic, traitor, or a bigot. Social ostracism. Canceled, shunned, ghosted. Online harassment. Dogpiling, moral outrage, getting doxxed, or even physical aggression. History is full of examples, from witch hunts to ideological purges to when you see how violent the protests are currently right now from the left. But this isn't just about bad actors. It's about the brains being shaped by fear. So when your childhood taught you that being wrong equaled being unloved, that someone challenging your beliefs doesn't feel uncomfortable, it actually feels unsafe. Disagreement can trigger cognitive dissonance, that gut-wrenching anxiety when facts don't fit your worldview, fear of consequences like hellfire or public shaming, loss of self because the belief was the identity, loss of community. The people who once loved you might now condemn you. Neuroscience adds another interesting layer here, one that makes ideological rigidity more understandable, even if it's not excusable. Dr. Ian McGilchrist, in The Master of His Emissary, outlines how the brain's left and right hemispheres don't just process information differently, they perceive reality differently. And we're not talking about left brain equals logic and right brain equals creativity, but more like left brain equals control, categorization, and certainty. Right brain equals context, relationship, and meaning. So when a balanced brain, the right hemisphere leads, it sees the big picture, embraces nuance, and stays grounded in a lived reality. The left hemisphere refines, classifies, and helps us act. But modern culture has flipped the script. We let the left hemisphere hijack perception, reducing the complex to the manageable, the mysterious to the measurable. In this flipped hierarchy, ambiguity will feel threatening, context gets stripped away. Relationship is sacrificed for abstraction, and certainty becomes a kind of drug. And that's why rigid ideologies can feel so comforting. The left brain craves clear structure and certainty, even if it comes at the cost of flexibility or nuance. It would rather be certain and wrong than uncertain and real. So, when someone questions your belief, it's not just inconvenient. It shatters the left brain's illusion of control. And when that illusion is all you've known since childhood, isn't just intellectual, it's existential. It's a threat. When belief becomes identity. So in The Righteous Mind, which I talk about all the time on this podcast, explains that we don't arrive at beliefs through pure logic. We have moral intuitions, quick, gut-level judgments that when our reasoning brain, usually the left hemisphere, steps in, not to find the truth, but to defend the tribe. The moment someone questions our truth, we don't hear it as a conversation. We hear it as an attack. So why do we react this way? Well, when beliefs are fused with identity, disagreement is going to feel like annihilation, especially when the community around us reinforces that fusion. So here's the pattern. Fear of deviation. Questioning is framed as betrayal, either spiritual or social. Cognitive dissonance. New ideas are going to create discomfort, and doubling down feels safer than rethinking. Fear of consequences, from hellfire to being canceled. The cost of questioning is very high. Identity threat. When belief equals self-worth, letting go feels like losing yourself. Social pressure. Communities often reward conformity and punish dissent. And this is where McGilchrist, and I don't know if I'm saying that right, and Hated align beautifully. One shows us how the brain gets hijacked by the need for control. The other shows us how morality binds us to our tribe and blinds us to complexity. In season 2, with our episode with Neil Van Leeuwen, the author of Religion as Make-Believe, we unpacked another crucial insight. Factual beliefs are flexible, but identity-based beliefs are not. They don't require evidence. In fact, falsehoods often serve the group better because they signal loyalty, not logic. And this is why both sides of the political aisle can believe obviously contradictory things, because the truth is secondary to belonging. And once we belong, we might not think critically, but we're definitely going to defend instinctively. So what's the antidote? Intellectual humility. The only way out is through a kind of self-aware disruption. We do this by open dialogue, spaces where disagreement isn't punished but explored, supportive communities, groups that allow for doubt, evolution of thought, and honest questioning, personal reflection, a willingness to examine the stories that we tell ourselves and why we need them, interdisciplinary curiosity. Instead of staying in one thought silo, we pull from neuroscience, sociology, philosophy, anthropology, and of course lived experience. Fundamentalism at its core is the elevation of certainty over curiosity, but healing, freedom, and truth, they live on the other side of that certainty. So, what's one belief that you once clung to tightly only to realize it wasn't the whole truth? I'd love to hear from you. And remember, maintain your curiosity, embrace skepticism, and keep tuning in. Because we're not here to worship reason or reject it. We're here to see more clearly. Have a good week.